And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. Delighted to be joined by my friend John Foshee today. John is the co-founder and chief revenue officer at Porter Logistics. They offer flexible third-party logistics services to startups right through to large-scale enterprise clients. John, a warm welcome, sir. How's it going, mate?
Hi, thanks for having me on, Sam. Really appreciate it.
No worries, dude. So this is going to be a hugely valuable episode, I am sure, for both for myself and everyone that's tuning in today. So we're talking all about how you can bootstrap a startup. We're cutting out the bullshit. We want to actually get in because I know, John, you've actually done it yourself with your partner. You've built it from the ground up. So you've been there, you've done it. I haven't. I came into a business fairly later once it had been developed. So I came on board as a founder a few years in. So this is going to be really useful. So we'll be talking all about how things to think about, how you can leverage your marketing, how can you leverage your sales, and perhaps there's going to be a lot of things, in fact I'm sure there will, that people don't necessarily think about until they actually get stuck into the nuts and bolts and the nooks and crannies of building a business. So first things first, John, what do we need to think about before we even start, before we even get stuck into our business? What should we be planning for?
I think the first thing I would advise is if you're reading, management books and Peter Drucker and Good to Great, 0 to 1, put them down. The consultant, I come from the consulting world. There's a lot of great advice for organizations that have already existed for, 50 years. They've got $1 billion on the P&L. They've got huge organizations supporting them. When you're bootstrapping a startup, you need to throw all the rules out the window and really, get back to basics. I think starting a company on one's own is really hard. The vast majority of great companies usually started with 2 or at least 3 people, truly a founding team. And so I think, if you're thinking about starting a company and you're looking for a partner, you really need to have a lot of thought into the partnership, what each of you bring to the table. Ideally, you have complementary skill sets, and most importantly, you trust each other. Ultimately, you want to think about what does the management team ideally need to be good at, need to think about what your skill set is, and then how do you two fit together. My background is management consulting, but specifically in marketing strategy, marketing analytics, marketing measurements, kind of on the technology side as well. So my role as the chief revenue officer was sort of a natural fit, right? Because it fit my skill set. Where I was weak or weaker, comparatively was, financials, creating the business plan, thinking about cash flow, thinking about runway, having, financial connections in terms of, raising money. And that's where my partner, Rob, is our CEO and a close friend of mine from college, ultimately decided that we didn't really have any overlapping skill sets. We both think very differently, which, invites conflict at times, but at the end of the day, if you're a management team and you both agree with each other all the time on everything, the odds of your success are going to be much lower. Ultimately, good outcome comes through productive conflicts and then, being able to resolve those amicably, and sort of get through to an ultimately what the market wants.
Yeah, makes sense. So do you think you mentioned there having almost because in your case, John, you had a co-founder. Do you think everyone needs someone else that they can bounce ideas off, that perhaps covers strengths where they've got weaknesses, and someone that can basically, like you said, slap you into shape if you're perhaps not really too sure on a certain subject and you think one idea is great, when someone might have kind of strengths in other areas and kind of whip you back in line?
100%. And I think history proves that out. I mean, everybody thinks Steve Jobs when they think Apple, but everybody forgets that he had Steve Wozniak, right? Jobs was the visionary. Wozniak was the technology guy. Everybody thinks that Mark Zuckerberg, right, was the, true founder of Facebook. But if you even watch The Social Network, the whole movie is premised on the fact that he had a partner or two, depending on who's interpreting it, whether they were treated well or not. But, a lot of these great, entrepreneurs that are celebrated across the globe, they all had co-founders that really brought something different to the table. Zuckerberg was a coder. What's his face? I can't even remember his name. He was the financial guy. Steve Jobs, the visionary. Wozniak, the tech guy. So I really believe in that. At minimum, one co-founder, potentially even three. And I really believe that you have to both think very differently. You need to bring different skill sets to the table, and that's ultimately going to, enable you to build a more productive company.
Interesting. Okay, and playing to your strengths by the sounds of it, because you said you knew that you were strong in marketing and you knew that your partner was good in sales. So that almost sounds like a winning combination. If you've got those two things nailed, then that's going to be a good starting point.
Exactly. You have to have someone who has the big ideas, and you have to have someone who covers the details. So yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Okay. And then pushing it forward. So when I've talked about starting up businesses on the podcast with past guests, there's been all sorts of kind of talk about when you should focus in on a product or service. And a lot of the things that seem to ring through is it needs to be something that you're either passionate about the product or the outcome that it provides for your customer. Are you kind of the same, John, that it needs to be something like that? Otherwise there's no longevity in it? Or when someone's thinking of starting a business like you have, what are some of the things they need to kind of bear in their mind to make sure it has got a long-term sustainable mindset?
I'll talk about passion and product in just a second, but I think thinking for the long term, one of the things that really doesn't get covered in a management book or that people don't think of is when you're raising money and trying to bootstrap the company, what direction you want to go. There's really two options. One, you can actually try to bootstrap it yourself, which is dipping into your own cash reserves, hitting up a friend, a family member, ex-colleagues, so on and so forth. You can go that route. It's going to take you a long time to raise the money. It's going to be considerably harder and more difficult on you. But the upside is, you'll ultimately control the company for much longer if you do end up taking institutional rounds. The pro is, again, you'll retain control farther into the future. The downside is if your startup goes to zero, and 90% of startups do end up failing, you have to be okay with the idea of looking your mom, your friend, your dad, your ex-boss, hey, I lost all your money, and you got to come hat in hand. And some people can't handle that stress, right? And that's totally fine. Everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities.
Sure.
The other option is go the institutional route. I want to go VC, maybe I'm pre-revenue. I've got an idea or I've got a concept off the ground. You can go to VC. They're going to take a much bigger chunk up front. And it's likely after round 2 or 3, you're going to lose control of the board. But you're going to be able to scale faster. You're going to have a little bit bigger war chest to start with and to invest in and make mistakes. And if it does go to zero, I'm not saying that it wouldn't hurt, but at the end of the day, you don't have a personal relationship. And so it's a business transaction. You just sort of wave to each other as you pass each other in the night, and, it's no harm, no foul. So it sounds like it's a minor thing, but you should really, really give consideration and understand the implications of, do I try to bootstrap it? It's going to be much harder on myself. You're going to put yourself through some pain, and it's going to take a longer time, to scale. Or do I go that institutional route and maybe speed up progress, but maybe give up some things on the back end?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one, right? And even if you think you want to go the funding route, getting VC money isn't that easy, as far as I know. So it's
correct. VC is not guaranteed. No, it's not guaranteed. There's a lot of it is network. A lot of it is polish. VCs have an idea of one of the things that VCs don't talk about. They want to believe in the product. They want to believe that you're very, revolutionary, right, in whatever you're doing. But the other thing that they're thinking of is this person backable? Is he or she somebody that I can go take on a roadshow to, a private equity fund, a growth equity fund, somewhere like longer down the line with bigger pockets? Because ultimately that's how I, as a VC, am going to make my money, right? I'm going to get bought out. And so one of the things they're thinking of is this person polished? Can I put them in front of a big room? Ultimately, can I really sell them and the company at a later date? So again, one of those things. I know this is sort of the no BS podcast, but I'm trying to provide some context of things that you don't really hear in the management books.
Yeah, I think you've laid down the both options quite nicely, really, because you've said, look, there's a lot of stress and a lot of things could go wrong if you fund it yourself.
Yep.
Because if you're taking other people's money, ultimately, if it all goes to Dres, then you've got to explain to them when everything's gone south.
Exactly.
Then likewise, if you go the venture capitalist route, you've got to lose a potential big amount of the percentage of ownership of the company and hand that over to whoever takes it on board. So good things to consider. Okay, and then once we've nailed down what way we want to go in terms of actually funding this thing, how do we go about? And perhaps we can keep this kind of fairly short and sweet before we get into the nuts and bolts of marketing and sales. How do we go about kind of really planning our idea? And I know you were going to come on to kind of thinking a long-term mindset and stuff like that. So what things should we think about before we actually kick this thing off and kind of get stuck into it full time? Or do we go full time? Do we keep part time our 9-to-5 job?
I think the trap that founders fall into is that to be an entrepreneur, you do have to have at some level a little bit of an ego and a little bit of confidence, right? That says, I'm going to create something out of nothing. The trap that you fall into, though, for that type of personality is, I have an idea of what I want the company to be and what I think people will want. And a lot of founders fall in the trap of, this is my idea, and they keep trying to push the company in their original idea or conception. What you should be doing is, what does the market want? I'm listening to my customers. I may have an idea. I may have a great idea, but when I float it to potential customers or we get our first couple in, they're giving me feedback that like, yeah, this is like nice, but what would be really cool, right, is X or Y, and sort of being able to put your ego aside, be able to actually listen to the market and form your company that way, as opposed to thinking that you've got the idea all figured out before you actually go build the company. So you have to have some structure, you have to have a thesis, you have to have an idea. But my advice to any early stage founder would be, listen, shut up. I know like you're enamored with yourself and your pitch deck and, everything you've gone on the road and told people with, but listen to customers. You may find answers that you maybe weren't expecting. A good example is, we had a good idea of what our pricing model was going to be. It was going to be by the item. It was going to be revolutionary. It turns out nobody wanted that. Right. So they loved our concept. We got validation of our concept when we sort of floated the idea. People said, "Oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, I can't believe no one's doing that." And that was validation that the idea at least was good. But when we got into the actual execution of it, maybe what we thought or how it could be executed was actually much different than what resonated with customers. So my biggest advice would be, listen, put your ego aside and listen.
Love that point. Something I rant on about all the time, actually, when it comes to web design, digital marketing, and that front, is that flipping it to this is that people often, when it comes to their own sites, will design it on what they think looks great. So they'll be like, yeah, this website's going to look good because I personally like this design and I've seen all these sites that are really, really cool. When ultimately, just like you've said there, John, it matters what the market thinks. So it matters what your potential clients, your ideal customers that are actually going to be using the site, or in this case, the product of your business, it matters what they think because they're going to be the ones using it. You're not the customer. You're not the one that's going to be dealing with them. You're not going to be talking to sales. You're not going to be buying this product or making inquiries. So that's such sound advice. Is there, how would you advise people actually go about doing that in a tangible way? Should they bring up an MVP and then start offering that to prospects, or is there a strategy that you recommend?
Yeah. So I think before you even get to that step, I would schedule some time with friends and family, mentors, and ultimately try to set up some interviews to actually sort of pitch the idea and just sort of use them as a sounding board. That the idea is not really developed. It could be a vague concept or it could be close to developed. But at the end of the day, you really want to talk to people in your network to get feedback and validation that in fact is something good. I mean, I think a lot of people, like I said, they just sort of are enamored with their own idea and they just bull through it without ever getting validation. It's something that people want. I think it's also important to make sure that you interview people who are ultimately going to be your customers. So like,
Sure.
yes, you get some level of feedback from mom and dad, but you have to also consider that they're biased, right? Your friends, your family, your personal network, they're going to be less, or they're going to be reticent to ultimately tell you that, that idea is trash, right? Or, that's maybe, hey, that's kind of good. Maybe you should look over
Well,
here.
yeah, they love you, right? And your friend is such a good point. And I was having a bit of a debate again, bring it back to digital marketing. Someone was saying to me, well, you could just interview your friends and family about launching a website or a digital project. It was like, yeah, like just like you said quite lightly there, John, they're going to be biased, aren't they? They like you. Well, they probably like you. So they're going to
Exactly.
give you, they're always going to have that spin where they're going to give you more positivity than they should do. Whereas if you
Yeah.
interview strangers that are potential customers, they're going to be raw. They're going to cut out the BS and get straight to the point, you would have thought.
Yeah, you should really seek out people that you don't know. Maybe they're friends of friends of friends. They're in your network, or maybe they're just cold outreach. But I would very much stress that you have to be very cognizant of removing bias from that ideating process. Otherwise, it's just going to be a self-reinforcing narrative.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yes, and then I think what was the second part of your question? I can't remember.
Yeah, so we were talking about bringing up an MVP. So
Yeah.
you mentioned customer interviews, and then we were talking about kind of actually, well, in my sense, I was saying, how do you know it's going to have a long-term value? And I guess
Yeah.
that kind of wraps up what you're getting to now.
Yeah, I think for an MVP, you have to you really have to put some thoughts into you can't, let me start with this. You can't build everything flexibly. You can't build everything with the mindset that ultimately you can just change it later, right? Because that just means you're just going to scrap it and start over again, which, by the way, if that's the solution, you shouldn't feel ashamed of doing it. There's the whole sunk cost fallacy. But I think you have to be thoughtful around what are the bones that we know are not going to change, for this business to be successful. So for us, right, we knew that bundling transportation and sort of warehousing storage was going to be very critical. And so that's something that we could build in a little more robust way, in a foundational way, because we knew that for the business to work, or for the thesis to have any hope of surviving, that those were going to have to be things that that stood the test of time. There are other things like the front end, the marketing side, the sales side, that you really want to leave flexible, and you want to leave the ability to test and change, because how you go to markets, what copy, and I know this as a digital marketing expert, what's the copy, what's the intent, of the user, where do people get hung up in the user experience? Those are things that you really don't want to be wedded to. There are some things where you really need to sort of stick your, foot in the ground and, take a strong position on. But for the rest, you need to have strong opinions, but hold them weakly. Means reserving the right to change your mind or change it at a later date.
Good.
But
Good.
yes, you definitely do need to get an MVP up at some point, because the biggest thing is just getting started. A lot of companies fail from the whiteboard, and the ideation to, you just got to take that first step, like call that developer, call WebChoice UK, right? And just like get an estimate, like just see what is actually going to cost to do it. Because by taking those steps, you'll actually get the ball rolling, where if you're just talking about it, that can be an endless loop that ultimately no action ever really comes from.
Yeah, and we could dedicate a whole podcast just to pre-planning, but we'll try and kind of get into some more in terms of the marketing and running the sales as well in a bit. I do have a question though. This when we're at the stage of interviewing, so we've done our friends and family, then we want to get on some cold prospects, potential customers that don't know about our business, so they're not going to show us love, they're going to say the blunt truth. If we are getting pretty negative feedback and we've interviewed a considerable amount of people, even though we love this project, we love this idea, we love this business, and we've perhaps spent a lot of spare time working on it, should we ditch it and move on to something that the market do like?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's two options. You just ditch it fully and go in a completely different direction, or you really need to go back to the drawing board. Just sort of think about, for some people, the idea is at a stage of, I know there's a hole in this market. right? I know there's an underserved piece of this market. I know there's a pain point, and maybe the way that you chose to attack it and pitch it just isn't the right way. If you're confident that there is a problem to be solved, you may just go back to the drawing board and think about a different way of approaching it. If not, it's, if the feedback you're getting is, yeah, it's like sort of annoying, but I just do this, or I've
Yep.
got this, I've got this workaround, or I found someone that solves this problem. That might be a sign that you need to go, let it go, and that can be painful, right? Especially if you've invested a lot of time, a lot of mental energy. I would say, though, look on the bright side. To anyone who's ever done that, simply going through the exercise of thinking about the company, interviewing people, it's often going to stimulate your brain and your thinking such that your idea is either going to be much, much more improved, or it's going to lead you to something better that ultimately was meant to be, right? It was better off. It was better off for you. So I wouldn't, the other big thing with entrepreneurial, pursuits is you really have to have a good way of reconciling failure, because you will fail all the time. I mean, you're literally trying to discover something that's novel, and there's no playbook. There's no way to. There's no rules to follow. Those management books, don't listen to them. Right? They don't really provide any practical feedback. You're ultimately just going to have confidence in yourself, but the ability to recognize that failure is really just a stepping stone to a success that'll happen later on that you just can't see yet.
Good. No, I like it. I like it. Okay. So let's pretend in this instance that our idea has got some good feedback. We've not had to ditch it.
Mm-hmm.
How, taking that first leap, John? I mean, do you think that, providing we've got some kind of funding, whether we've bootstrapped it fully and we've got perhaps our own money saved up, or we've got friends and families, or a combination, or we've gone the venture capitalist route and they've given us a big sum of money, do we just go all in with ourselves, if it's just us or a partner, and just start throwing money at marketing, at sales? Or do we keep it small, so perhaps we keep our 9-to-5 job and we slowly work on it in the evenings and weekends? What would you advise? Is there one route?
No, there isn't. There isn't one route. Some people are fortunate enough to be able to quit and go full time. Those people will likely not be able to take a salary for 6 to 9 months. I was fortunate enough to have had a nice career, prior there, and that saved a lot of money. So I was able to quit, go full time. I did get a job waiting tables at a Mexican restaurant, from like 6 p.m. to 11 for the first couple of months, just so I didn't burn through all my personal capital. I do think that if you can devote all your time to it and you can make the numbers work, I would certainly recommend doing that. You just may have to, reconcile yourself to rice and beans, for like 6 to 9 months. But sometimes, hey, that's what it takes. Like, it's not easy. So what I would say is, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do that, or if you can find a way to make it work, if you can get some roommates or something, I think devoting all your energy into it will definitely be useful. It also depends on, really the kind of company that you're trying to build. If it's really more technology focused and you don't need to have an operations team, might be able to get by with doing that part-time. Because you really want to get an MVP up and just see, are users interested in this? You can somewhat handle support, quote unquote, yourself. But if you're trying to build kind of a brick and mortar meat and potatoes business, like the one that I've started, that has a lot of moving parts, it would have been almost impossible to do that while having a full-time job. So, in any case, I think it depends on your situation, but if you can go all in, and not fear for your life, that's what I would recommend doing.
Yeah. Got it, man. So let's say we have gone all in. What are some of the first things we got to nail down? And appreciate this is going to be subjective depending on the sector, the vertical you're in.
Yeah.
But what are some of the kind of core basics that we've got to think about in terms of lining up our marketing, lining up our sales, and bringing this thing to market, really?
Yeah. No, I think, I read something the other day that like 40 to 50% of like young startups revenue goes towards like Google and Facebook, right? For like Google ads and that sort of thing, which is sort of a ridiculous number. But there is a reason why those avenues are used well. Traditional sort of brick and mortar marketing, whether it's TV, radio, billboards, signage, those typically only work at scale, right? So like if anybody's trying to pitch you on radio ads or targeted TV or, whatever it is, I would say just put your blinders on and don't move forward with that. At the early stages, you really are testing. You don't even know what turns of phrase, right, are going to resonate with your customers. So, any sort of big expensive campaigns, you want those nailed down. You want confidence that you know what people are going to respond to, that you can credibly sort of advertise, and on all those sorts of things. I would definitely recommend starting small. The other thing to consider is that if you all of a sudden blow out some big marketing campaign and you have all these customers in your lap, that may be a bad thing if you're not ready to handle it. Because ultimately you only get, one shot, maybe two, at impressing your customers. And if you ruin your brand by, filling up the funnel and then not being able to execute, you might shoot yourself in the foot, before the thing even gets off the ground. So I would dip my toe in something like Google Ads. I would test, wildly different, ad copies. I would keep those cost per clicks really low, see what tends to convert. And that way you can sort of conserve your capital and use it wisely. Once you've got a good, decent sample size, call it a month, maybe, month and a half, something like that. Then that's when I would start, pouring the dollars into it. But definitely start small, because you can get yourself into trouble if you just open the floodgates without having a good handle on it.
Yeah. So talking about things like ads, so I mean, is that kind of what you did and what you recommend, John? Is obviously with things like Google AdWords, it's something that you can measure well, you can do a good test of, and you can understand what your cost per click is going to be per ad, what your cost per acquisition or cost per lead or cost per sale, depending on what you're offering, whether it's a product or a service-based business.
Sure.
Are there other things that people should, obviously marketing's a massive term, as is sales outreach. Should we be looking to do some kind of cold outreach at the same time whilst we're looking at kind of perhaps paid spend to get inbound, or is it come to the point where that's, in your opinion, not worthwhile? Or
if your target clients are B2B, ideally you're selling into businesses, and you're the founder, you are your company's own best salesman. Yes, you want to get, the funnel filled with marketing, but cold outreach, networking, I mean, it all sounds really old fashioned, but, there are things you could do online, like using LinkedIn. Sam, I know you put out a great guide for LinkedIn, outreach and what's the best way to do that. Been extremely helpful for us, but I would definitely, use that as a way to, network. At the end of the day, having, CEO, co-founder, just anything with a C in front of it is going to let you have conversations that maybe you can't get if you're, a senior account executive, sales and marketing. So I think, founders really underestimate their ability to go out and sell. And really, you are your company's best salesman. You're going to be more passionate about the company than anybody you hire. You're going to know the thesis, better than anyone that you could ever hire, because it is your baby, right? You have built it. And so you can speak about it the way that a parent, right, or a proud mom or dad, cares about their kid winning a trophy. So I think that kind of enthusiasm is contagious. I would say get out of the office. You need to get out there and network with people. COVID's starting to subside, so that's a little bit easier now. But I would look for networking opportunities. It could be your local chamber of commerce. Again, it sounds old fashioned, but those kinds of relationships really play dividends. And in the B2B side, all it takes is one. All you need to do is get the right client on board, the right customer who wants to take an interest in you, and you're off to the races.
I probably shouldn't say this, but one of my best clients to date, believe it or not, was back when I was working for a startup. This is probably spinning back about 4 years ago. And this wasn't WebChoice. This was before I came back to WebChoice as a co-owner, sorry. And this was cold calling. So I was cold calling like a few hours every day, literally till I was dripping in sweat and skipping lunch breaks and all that good stuff, because I had no cash at the time. So I was just trying to get as many sales meetings as I could. And one of the best clients I still work with. I spent thousands and thousands with us on various web projects. It was from a cold call, from a relationship that I started on a cold call, met them a couple times in London, and just over time that relationship's nurtured. Digital marketing is still our best way to get clients inbound, but that's just funny that that cold call over time played off dividends. So sometimes, like you say, these one unusual way of reaching out to people, whether it's networking, whether it's something else, can pay off in the long run.
Yeah. I think, one other thing that I didn't mention is when you're starting something, like you say, you're skipping lunch, you're calling all the time. There is a little bit of a desperation factor, especially if you're bootstrapped. VC funded either. You've only got a certain amount of runway, right? You've really got to make it happen. People fall into the trap of, what can you do for me? Me. I'm reaching out to people and saying, like, help me, save me, right? At the end of the day, it is a transactional relationship. The best thing that you can do when you're selling and cold calling is offer them something in return. Every call should end with, like, thank you so much for the call. What can I do for you? How can I help you? What can I provide you? And it can be like very big things, or it can honestly be really small things. I think it plays into human psychology. We were meeting with, one of our peers here in the Atlanta market. And it's a very sort of, incestual is not the right word, but like we share clients, everybody kind of knows whose clients are whose. If I've got a warehouse, I have a very finite box, right, into which I can fit clients. At some point, I'm going to run out of space, right? I'm going to run out of capacity. And so I want to be able to call, someone down the street and say, hey, I can share I can share some business with the hope that they're ultimately going to do it in return. Or, we haven't had that problem yet in the sense where we've had to send one of our customers somebody else's way, but there are more mature companies who might be able to throw you a bone, right, as a small startup. And so you can try to do something for them. In this one particular example, we had found this incredible vendor, that does a very specific piece of the logistics process really well. They've got a comparative advantage. They do it more cheaply and better than anyone else. We asked them what they were spending on the specific process, and it was like 4x what we were spending. And so we said, hey, have you guys tried this particular company is called J&E? Have you guys tried J&E, right, for your lumping and breaking loads and that sort of thing? This is their price per container. We're super impressed with them. And, someone from J&E went over to, one of our peers. They initiated a contract like 2 days later. And almost a week after that, they called us up and said, thank you so much for that introduction. It's helped us tremendously. You know what? I think actually I do have something coming up that I can send you, right? And so, you really have to think about what are those ways, even small ways. It could be something as small as recommending a vendor, to help something and not necessarily expect something in return. Now, of course, you're playing the long game and you're hoping for something that comes in return. But the more that you can provide value and help, either your clients or potential prospects or so on and so forth, just the human psychology of, wow, they really did me a solid. I see them as equal, maybe to, the other vendors in the space, but you know what? They really helped me out and did me a solid. So I'm going to send them my business. Again, that sounds old fashioned. Really the techniques for sales and marketing have changed in terms of just reach, technology, all those sorts of things. But the foundational psychology of it is the same. And I think people in our generation, and I say our, I'm 31, right? I'm a millennial. I think people really can lose sight of that. They just think if I can, get clicks to site and I can, look at all these metrics, which are very important. It's extremely foundational. It's extremely important, but you can't lose sight of ultimately you have to be in your decision maker's head and you have to provide value to those decision makers.
I love that point about giving without expectations. So even if you can't help someone today, giving them perhaps some useful advice or literally asking how I can help you or giving them as a useful resource. I never used to do that, but I did like recently. I'm lucky that I've got a lot of resources. So I do a lot of LinkedIn. I've obviously got the podcast. So quite often I can point people maybe to perhaps certain podcast episodes that might be of use to them, or hand them a useful guide. Or the chances are your business has probably got something that might help them. So if they say, look, I could do with help with X, Y, Z. Think about if you've got an existing resource, or think about if you can point them to someone, or if you've got a partner company in your case, like you said, John. And that is a really good way to get your foot in the door. And the chances are, if they do find that of use, they'll come back, and it'll help you in the long run. So that's.
Yeah, people are shocked at how effective it is. I mean, I think I can probably hear the skepticism, right, in all of the listeners right now, just saying like, so like you're telling me I can just win business by, helping out a client without any expectation in return? And the answer is yes. And there's data to prove it. Just my personal experience proves it. I think your personal experience, Sam, proves it as well. So
Definitely.
I think, there's a place for numbers and data and quant, and that's my background, and I believe in it, and you have to have it, and it's really table stakes. But I would advise young founders to, even if you don't think you can give much, there's always something that you can give. There's always a favor you can pull. There's always something that you can do that's ultimately going to make you more memorable.
Cool. Well, we're coming up to time, John, but we'll probably get you back on in the future to cover some of these topics in a bit more detail.
Wow, that went by fast. I feel like we just started.
So, we've touched on kind of the things you need to think about before you grow the business. We've talked about the early stage. We've talked about think about marketing. When it comes to growth, when it comes to perhaps looking to take on your first sales guy, or whether you take on a marketer, or whatever you decide to go on, how do you know when it's the right time? When is too soon, or when is too late?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's a great question. So in our experience, and this goes actually back to pivoting and listening to the client. So we originally conceived our company to be a direct-to-consumer self-storage. I go pick up your personal effects. It could be a couch, a bed, a dresser, clothes, and we're going to go pick that up and come into storage. What eventually started happening were businesses would just find us organically and just think, and they kept telling us like, this isn't exactly what I need, but what you have, which is, innovative software that can track my inventory, a warehouse, trucks, and the ability to manage those logistics. No one's really serving us. Like, I'm having to piece together all these different vendors to kind of do this. And we just started thinking like, okay, there's something here. It eventually grew to about 15% of our revenue, business, B2B, as opposed to direct to consumer, which we had originally conceived the company to be. At that point, we started thinking, okay, B2B, this is growing without us really even trying. Let's see what happens if we can really juice it, with a salesperson. I guess the operative lesson for that is, I would refrain from hiring a sales resource until you feel like you've really nailed that value proposition. So like we talked earlier in the podcast of being open to changing your mind, to, maybe letting go of the original concept and moving in the direction of what clients want. I would think only at that point where, you really feel confident that you've nailed that, you've listened to the market, this has legs, and I know who exactly I need to sell into. That's when you hire your first salesperson. Because, again, as we stated earlier, as the founder, you are your best salesperson. At the end of the day, you can speak to the company at a level really that nobody else can. And you need to really use yourself as a testing ground to find that niche, find that, offering to the market. And then once you feel confident that you've nailed it, then it's time to go ahead and, really, you hear the phrase add fuel to the fire. You have to have a fire first. So once you're confident in that, that's when you bring in sales. That's when you can start pumping the marketing. But there's a lot of foundational work that has to go into place before you do that, because at the end of the day, when you do that, there's no going back. You likely have very little cash in the bank. You likely have very little runway left, and you have to execute and hit it, or you're going to be going to zero really, really fast. So it's not to scare anyone. It's to scale and grow. You have to have sales. You have to have marketing, but you can get into trouble if you do it before you're ready. So really put in the time yourself as the founders, or the early people in the company to, find that niche, test all of your hypotheses, and then once you're confident, that's when you start pouring it on.
Yeah, I love that point, and I love the point that the founder or the founders are the best salespeople because they know the product inside out. They've researched the market. They know what the USP is. They know what the benefits are. They know how the problem it fixes. So they literally know everything about it. So I think a lot of founders are perhaps, or some that I've spoke to, are perhaps skeptical about selling themselves, and they think that they need a sales team straight away. So I think that's one of the big myths that needs to be really kind of busted. And
yeah, if you're not willing to get your hands dirty, you're not going to succeed. Just, and that's the other thing, that if you're coming from a large company like I did, you have supporting infrastructure, right? You have people that handle, right, things that you never even thought of. And as a founder, if you're thinking that you're going to try to bootstrap a company, but you're just going to like sit in the office and, direct people and just, act the way you did at your prior job, I guarantee you that you're going to fail. You've got to get out there. You've got to put in the time. And it's really hard too, because when you're running the company, you're worried about operations, you're worried about finance, you're worried about money in the bank. But you have to get out there in a sales effort and sell the company, sell yourself, sell the vision. People are drawn to that too. I mean, people intuitively, I think, admire entrepreneurial, pursuits. And you can argue whether they should or not, but I think that, as a rule, I think they do. They admire the risk-taking, the confidence, the vision. And I think you'll be surprised at the amount of people that'll be willing to talk to you, the amount of people that'll be open with you and, really want to help you if you can, help them. So I would think all founders should know that, the best thing you can do is get out there early on, save the money, save the cash, validate your hypothesis, validate your idea, and then only after that has happened, then you start, hiring a team.
Love it. Solid advice, John. And with that, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really, really enjoyed the chat. Massively useful for myself, and I'm sure everyone that's tuned in. Please do tell us more, sir, about how we can learn from you, how we can connect with you, and how we can do business with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're located, our URL is www.porter-logistics.com. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the biggest logistics hubs in the U.S. We do business with clients from all over the world, whether it's the UK, Middle East, Africa, really anywhere across the globe. You can reach out to me at John, John, at porter-logistics.com. Again, that's John at porter-logistics.com. If you're interested in logistics, feel free to reach out. But, I'm always up to just talk about sales, marketing, U.S. football, the correct football around the globe, I should say.
Listen to him.
Yeah, no. I know. I'm saying you guys have it correct.
Actual soccer. Correct. Oh, good. Football, soccer. Good.
Yeah, that's right. No, I do. Soccer's catching on here in the U.S. I'm telling you, we're not quite Premier League yet, but we're getting better. So hopefully in our lifetimes we'll see some transatlantic, real matchups. But yeah, please feel free to reach out. Happy to help any young founders if you need advice or if you think you may want to do business. Also happy to discuss that as well.
Nice one, John. We'll put all of those links in the episode notes that will be available at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, I want to thank you once again, sir. Really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and have a good rest of your evening.
No worries, dude. And if you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit subscribe for Business Growth Show, wherever the heck you get your podcasts. We interview 2 business leaders each and every week to provide actionable tips across marketing, across sales, all with the goal to help you grow your revenue and grow your business. And we will catch you on the next episode. Cheers for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.